1 in 10 people you meet is running a different program than the rest of us. They look human. They speak our language. They understand cooperation enough to fake it convincingly. But underneath, they're executing something closer to a predator's algorithm. Extract resources, avoid costs, move on. Psychologists call them the Dark Triad. And the most disturbing part isn't that they exist. It's that their strategy works. The Dark Triad, Narcissism, Psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, isn't a disorder. It's an evolutionary solution to a specific problem: how to reproduce successfully without investing in others. While most humans evolved to balance short-term and long-term mating, forming bonds, and raising offspring together, a minority maintained what biologists call a fast life strategy, prioritizing immediate gains over sustained cooperation. In ancestral environments, this worked. You could extract resources, secure mating opportunities, and disappear before the costs came due. The program persisted because it only needs to succeed occasionally to pass on genes. Here is exactly how this program runs. In 2002, Delroy Paulhus and Kevin Williams published the paper that changed how we understand malicious personalities. They demonstrated that narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism, previously studied separately, cluster together reliably across populations. These aren't 3 random traits. They're 3 components of a coordinated exploitation system. Narcissism contributes grandiosity and entitlement. The narcissist genuinely believes they deserve more than others, which eliminates the cognitive dissonance that stops most people from taking without giving. Machiavellianism adds strategic thinking uncoupled from emotion. The Machiavellian can plan long-term manipulations without empathic interference, treating social relationships as chess games where other people are pieces. Psychopathy removes the emergency brake: guilt, fear of consequences, empathic distress at others' suffering. Together, these create a personality optimized for one question: what can I extract from this situation? In 2009, Peter Jonassen and his colleagues tested whether this configuration actually functions as a mating strategy. They surveyed men across the Dark Triad spectrum and found that higher scores predicted more sexual partners, more interest in casual sex, and active avoidance of committed relationships. The Dark Triad male pursues serial short-term mating, investing minimal resources in any one partner or offspring. And critically, the strategy succeeds. Dark Triad men reported significantly higher mating success than average men in the same populations. The program works through a 2-stage process. First, exceptional first impressions. Dark Triad individuals present as confident, charismatic, and socially skilled. They're practiced at reading what others want to hear and mirroring it back. Research shows they're rated as more attractive than average on initial encounters, particularly in contexts where depth of character can't yet be assessed. Second, rapid extraction and exit. Once they've secured what they want: sex, money, status, emotional support, the investment drops to 0. They don't experience the guilt or attachment that keeps most people invested in relationships. They simply move on to the next target. The costs are externalized entirely onto others. The pattern shows up everywhere once you learn to see it. In the workplace, a study by Babiak and Hare found that roughly 4% of corporate executives score high enough on psychopathy measures to meet clinical thresholds, about 4 times the general population rate. These individuals rise through organizations by taking credit for others' work, forming strategic alliances they abandon when convenient, and creating the appearance of competence through confident presentation while delegating actual work to subordinates. Their teams show higher turnover, lower morale, and reduced innovation. But the Dark Triad leader often exits to a better position before the long-term damage becomes visible. In romantic contexts, the script is eerily consistent. Partners of high Dark Triad individuals describe a near-identical pattern: intense initial pursuit, love bombing with promises of a shared future, followed by sudden emotional withdrawal once commitment is secured. Studies tracking these relationships show higher rates of infidelity, financial exploitation, and what researchers call post-relationship distress syndrome, psychological harm that persists long after the relationship ends. One longitudinal study followed dating patterns over 5 years. Men high in Dark Triad traits cycled through an average of 3 times more partners than the comparison group, with relationship durations rarely exceeding 6 months. Each partner reported similar experiences, feeling uniquely special at first, then confused and blamed when the attention vanished. The program doesn't require conscious malice. Many Dark Triad individuals experience their behavior as normal. They genuinely don't feel the guilt or attachment that would signal something is wrong. They're running code that treats other people as resources, not as agents with equivalent inner lives. The cost isn't symmetrical. Dark Triad individuals extract significant benefits while externalizing all costs onto others. Research by Nathanson and colleagues found that colleagues of high Dark Triad co-workers reported decreased job satisfaction, increased stress, and higher rates of considering leaving their positions. In relationships, long-term partners of Dark Triad individuals show elevated rates of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress symptoms, psychological costs that can persist for years after separation. But there's a second-order cost that's more insidious. Linda Mealy's frequency-dependent selection model explains why the strategy persists. It only works when most people aren't using it. Dark Triad traits are parasitic on cooperation. They exploit trust, reciprocity, and emotional investment, all of which only exist because most humans follow a different program. When exploitation succeeds visibly, it damages the cooperative substrate. People become more guarded, less willing to trust, more defensive in interactions. Trust erosion spreads through networks. One study demonstrated that teams exposed to a single high Machiavellian member showed decreased cooperation among all members even after the Machiavellian individual was removed. The presence of exploiters teaches cooperators to stop cooperating, degrading collective outcomes for everyone. At scale, this creates a tragic equilibrium. The Dark Triad strategy succeeds specifically because it's rare. If everyone adopted it, social systems would collapse and the strategy would fail. But as long as most people cooperate, a minority of defectors can thrive indefinitely. The research on changing Dark Triad individuals is unambiguous and bleak. These traits show moderate heritability. Genetic influence accounts for roughly 40–50% of variance. They're highly stable across the lifespan, with test-retest correlations above 0.7 over decades. Traditional psychotherapy is largely ineffective. A meta-analysis of treatment outcomes for psychopathy found no significant improvement in core traits, and some evidence that therapy makes high psychopathy individuals more effective manipulators by teaching them the language of emotions without generating actual empathic capacity. Narcissism shows slightly more flexibility, with modest decreases in grandiosity after age 40, but core exploitation patterns remain stable. What the research does support is structural intervention. The Dark Triad succeeds in environments with low accountability and high information asymmetry. When organizations implement transparent processes, distributed decision-making, and strong feedback mechanisms that make exploitation visible and costly, Dark Triad success rates decrease. In personal contexts, the most effective strategy is rapid exit once the pattern becomes clear. Unlike most relationship problems, Dark Triad exploitation doesn't respond to communication or boundary setting. Those simply teach the exploiter what language to use next time. Once you can see the script, your decision isn't whether to fix it. It's whether to keep running your end of the program they depend on. Next time, we'll decode the script behind something that seems like pure generosity, but functions as one of the most effective control mechanisms evolution ever designed: guilt. Once you can see the script, you can choose whether to keep running it. I'll see you in the next file.